Welcome to the Digible Dudes Podcast. I'm David.
I'm Reed.
And Reed, today we're talking to Edmund Keith, or Ed Keith.
He said we could call him Ed.
Exactly.
You're 10 minutes before I showed up.
Yeah.
Got you the Ed.
Yeah. He's from onlinemarketplaces.com, which couple of things I found really interesting in my lead up to him before we started recording, but he had said that he had come from industry and then got recruited effectively by a colleague that he had to run onlinemarketplaces.com. They have 3 major conferences a year, but throughout the year, as part of their strategy, they're writing content to help promote like their thought leadership. So this is why you would want to come to their website, but they cover global real estate marketplaces as opposed to North America. And I've always just stumbled upon them at times when I'm looking up like Australia or Europe or whatever. And the content that Ed and his team writes is always just got so much depth. It's not I was telling him, it's not like most articles these days where you go to, heck, I don't know, I'll pick on CNN or something, but there's like 2 sentences of
smack size, like bullets.
Yeah. Well, I actually love the bullets though. As you know, I love them.
Yeah, sure.
But anyways, where there's just more depth in research, it's almost like he's doing mini white papers or something on
more
this
long
industry.
form.
Yeah. They do cover online or like single family sales as well as rentals. So he's got more, breadth, and he said less depth, but to me, the guy has so much depth as we went through our conversation.
Yeah, he really does. I don't know who he's comparing himself to, but and from our perspective, I think there's plenty of depth, and I found it super fascinating. In particular, like, maybe too often we'll just say there's Asia, there's Europe, and a lot of that looks the same. And he went beyond those 2 continents. I mean, he literally, it is global. But just the nuances, even in Europe, as he started to talk about what's trending in Germany versus what they're, seeing in the UK, for example. So, super interesting. And he got into China and, talked about Brazil. And so, as you said, we could deep dive into any one of those and probably have a great podcast. So it's fun. I think this is just kind of a starting point, I guess, with Ed for us. And you also said maybe we bring him to the summit, and I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, it sort of felt like I don't know if you know the term fog of war. Well, in like strategy games, often you can't see beyond X point on the map until you get there. And it felt like he was lifting this fog of war for me as he was talking, because we've always heard like the US, and then we've talked to people that are starting to go outside the US with their management companies. And, I know that they're making big moves, but it's such a small sliver of the market as they move over there. And so as I understood it, it's like, okay, these other places like the UK or Germany or whatever there will be a landlord that owns one, as he now wants us to use the word home versus the word unit. So I love how he's passionate about that. But they'll have one home that they rent out. And he just doesn't see as many of these multifamily really being successful, at least any near term in the rest of the globe, except maybe in certain markets or pockets. And so anyways, as he was describing it, I was like, well, I'm sure Zillow's big elsewhere. I don't know like what CoStar has going on. And then he mentions that he tracks 900 different portals for real estate. It's like, okay, this is incredibly fragmented. And he believes that there's not going to be a winner take all, which I also think is really fascinating. And that there's going to be this long tail where people can be profitable. And that starts to make sense to me, because even the CoStars and Zillows here, we know they don't cater well to like student housing, and yet that's a large segment, or senior living, and that's a large segment. So then just imagine that across, almost 200 countries now.
Yeah.
So
he also said, and I don't want to call it naive, because that would be naive of me to call it naive, if that makes any sense, but that he didn't believe there was really room for a new player, like not of the, I'll say, caliber or status of a CoStar, respective to these other like European markets or whatever, global markets. And it said that he doesn't think performance models are the future, even though he said they make the most sense. So there was some interesting, I don't want to call them contradictions, but just, what's the best way of putting it? I don't know. Varying points, like that didn't really settle with each other. And that really is what creates the complexity that he pointed to, just with with real estate at large, and all the players that are inside of it. So he also mentioned, and I'm always curious to hear this, about where we're ahead, where we're behind from Europe's perspective, because he is in Madrid and, I think has the best handle there. But he said that prop tech, we're pretty far ahead. I'm not sure where he feels like we're the most behind. He also pointed to the MLS being unique, very unique to North America versus, everybody else has to pay to play in all these other markets. So there's some real big distinctions, and then some interesting comments on, or his thoughts about where things sit with AI. And again, like where we're at with prop tech, and then multifamily, the whole Zillow CoStar like distinction versus what he's seeing in these other 900 portals. Oh, by the way, portals, just for listeners, you could also think ILS. Not necessarily the exact same thing, but he got a kick out of the fact that we call them ILSs.
Yeah, that's probably one thing we're behind on.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. I was struggling to find that example, but
yeah, it's super. The whole thing is fascinating. Like he almost made it sound like it would be easier to stand up a portal in the U.S. because of I'll just say for single family sales, because you could just get all the data from one spot with an MLS feed.
Right.
And then it's about what you do on that. So as you were mentioning, like, could you throw AI on top of it to write more in-depth content? Or he talked about using AI to scan the images to write more content about it. And I've seen examples of that with like rural land sales, where there's a company like using AI to scan the image to then describe the land and say, okay, it's this close to a lake and it's got whatever, mostly grass and blah, blah, blah. So anyways, I just found all of that really fascinating about, just the industry being so fragmented elsewhere, and then how the business model must be so challenging. Because if you can't then just get all the listings from one place, it is like, okay, you got to now go get all those listings from these X thousands of landlords. And then you also have to get the consumers to go there and obviously try to monetize it. So I definitely wouldn't want to start one in another place, but
you need a shit ton, pardon my French, of capital.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what he was saying is that you would have to buy across borders instead of build across borders. So you buy someone else and then try to transform it. But it did make me think, the way he's describing is like, is it worth it for CoStar to do that? Because they're struggling a little bit in the US to do that with who they've bought up and to assimilate them. So instead, like, maybe it's going to be one of these industries where it's surprising, but it's like 20 years from now, there's still 700, of these portals because no one else has stepped in.
Yeah. Makes me think, as we were just talking Smack Recipe and Southwest Airlines, if, that's on the board, I'll say, for CoStar as far as what they won't do. Because right now it seems like they are in, pretty aggressive growth mode. And I'm curious what's off the table, or at least in the next 10 years. And this would be, I would assume, one of the bigger discussion points is how aggressive do we get when it comes to international.
Yeah, and it seems, to your point, that we've been seeing them do a lot of single family home sales and home rentals, like making activity towards that, which is just how do we expand our North American footprint and revenue, because he was also saying that they're one of the more profitable portals. So it's like maybe these other
60,
countries.
70%.
Yeah, so maybe one of these other countries, which is just tech margin, basically.
Yeah.
These other countries may be, I don't know what, if they're even half that, CoStar's probably like, well, there's no point to like really go after this
totally
low margin for a big headache. Well, anyways, fascinating conversation. Can't wait to have Ed back on, but I hope you guys listen to the whole thing and enjoy. Okay, we're here with Edmund Keith from onlinemarketplaces.com. Ed, I was just asking you if you prefer Ed or Edmund. I was saying Edmund sounds smarter, which actually I will now say you're British, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he doesn't need it. He doesn't need Edmund. He can, because of the British accent.
Yeah, he already wins.
Yeah, he already sounds smarter than us. Yeah, we actually recorded a voicemail, like I think first 6 months of the company. Nobody was calling us, so we didn't really care, but we've kept it, where we had a British woman record the voicemail, and at the very end it's tagged and just says, if you're still on the line, we're not located in the UK. We just thought having a British woman record our voicemail made us sound smarter. So it tells you how shallow we are.
Yeah, so there you go, Ed. But anyways, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and what you do for online marketplaces.
So I'm Edmund Keith, as you said. Ed to my friends. So you guys. We've been talking off air. We can go with Ed.
Yeah, we got 10 minutes of relationship. This is good.
Yeah. I'm the editor of a publication called onlinemarketplaces.com. We like to think of ourselves as the industry press, I guess, for real estate portals all around the world. We obviously have onlinemarketplaces.com, but the main way that we kind of, I guess, make money is through our conferences, which are Property Portal Watch and the Global Online Marketplaces Summit as well. So I guess for people in the US, I guess the kind of nearest comparison is like inman.com, but specifically for real estate portals.
Yeah, no, that's super. That's super helpful to help frame it for people in the U.S. And what I was surprised about when we were talking offline, and even when I researched you guys ahead of time, is that you're obviously now based. Well, you're from the U.K., but you're based in Spain, and your conferences are, you said, in Spain and Bangkok, and then you have one now, I guess, in the U.S. and Florida. But a lot of your audience then must be non-North American based, and you and I were just talking about the difference between North America and the rest of the world. So why don't you give us some background on that, on what's different about North America real estate rental market versus the rest of the world, and how that fits into you guys for your audience and how you write content.
North America is completely different to just about everywhere else, but as I found over the last 3 years in this job, every market is different. It's really interesting but very frustrating when you try and compare markets, because they all work differently. There's different commission percentages in every market. Sometimes when we're talking about real estate portals, sometimes it will be the vendor, so the seller that pays a real estate portal in some markets. So Australia and Sweden, it's the vendor that pays a real estate portal. Sometimes it's the agent that pays the real estate portal, but sometimes they're paying them for different things. So in the US, you've got the MLS, which means that every real estate portal can have all of the listings without having to convince all of the agents to give them their listings, right? So the business model is then you pay us for leads, right? But if you go over the Atlantic, in the UK, for example, it's completely different. It's the agents have to pay the real estate portals just to list their listings on those portals, right? Every market is completely different, as I said, and it took me a long time and an embarrassing interview with a Canadian CEO to work out exactly how the American rentals, or I should say the North American rentals market works. So here you've got a lot of build to rent, right? You've got developers will build a nice big apartment block, and then there'll be a company managing that apartment block, which will market each individual unit. Also, market all of the units on a real estate portal, and that's how it works. In other markets, it is completely different. I think we were just talking off air about kind of how it works in the UK, which is we use my mum as an example. My mum is a landlady. She owns one, what you guys would call rental unit, and bought it a long time ago and went through what we call a letting agent to put it on a real estate portal, get it rented out. But like I said, every market is different. There's all kinds of different models out there. But the US and Canada are absolutely unique, pretty much because they have the MLS.
And when it comes to globally, who's the big player? Because, obviously here we think about CoStar sort of owning the market. I don't even know if CoStar, it feels like they have like 70% of market share or something for the online. I'm just totally guessing on that. Is that true for the rest of the world?
Because Zillow in their Q4s, I think it was the CEO or maybe the CFO said something like, "We are approaching market leadership in rentals." So it's interesting that they're saying that. I don't know what metrics they're using to say that. But
sorry to interrupt, but there's a huge distinction between Zillow and CoStar. CoStar, I think David would say, is owning multifamily rentals, and then Zillow's owning single family. And Zillow has had a turbulent time, I'll say, getting into multifamily, and CoStar, really the other branch they have would be their commercial, but they haven't really shown to have much success, if any, with single family. So
yeah, no, that's fair. And our typical customer, Ed, is a property management company that has 10 buildings or more, the average probably being like 40 buildings. And so they don't really look at Zillow. Zillow is more of like for like small businesses or folks like your mom, right? That's how it is positioned in the US. There are some smaller mom and pop property management companies that will use Zillow to buy leads, but it's just not as well respected when it comes to like the big property management companies in the U.S. currently for multifamily. So
that's even interesting. What you just said is interesting to me because as far as I know, the rest of the world deals with sales and rentals, not sales and then single rentals and then multifamily rentals. It's sales and rentals, and the two are much closer, much closer on. I think just pretty much every market around the world. So the US and Canada is really unique in that, in the way it works. And you have some unique terminology as well, which I only kind of understood fairly recently.
And I think it should be closer to that. It's like if you're looking for a rental, you may be interested, like if you were going to rent here in Denver, you might be interested in a home if you knew you could afford a home. And when you look at the cost of some of the apartment rentals, it basically nears the same as a 2 or 3 bedroom. And so you might as well do that. But in this industry, CoStar has put like $150 million in marketing to work annually. And they also really have great SEO in the space. So when you're searching for 1 bedroom apartment, 2 bedroom apartment, or anything that has the word apartment, there are what's going to show up versus Zillow. If you're going to say like 2 bedroom house, they would show up. But in reality, many renters are just conditioned to these, as you're saying, built to rent multifamily buildings, and they don't really know about the opportunity to get, a single family rental for maybe the same cost.
That's really interesting. Are there any stats out there on what the kind of percentage split is in terms of like the housing stock, in terms of what percentage of, like, I guess you'd say units, what percentage of homes, potential homes there are that are what you guys would call multifamily, and what are, like my mum, for example?
Yeah, totally. We have good data internally. I don't know it off the top of my head for multifamily. There's about 200,000 buildings that are over 50 units in size. But when you look at single family, I'd seen a stat recently read that was something like, I almost don't know one minute's quote, but originally I was thinking that single family was going to be like, let's say 90%, like the owner lives in the property, and that's not the case. It's like more than half are actually owned and rented out by somebody, not by the owner. I don't have that handy right now to repeat back to you, but it was significant.
But that may be one of the bigger shifts that we're about to experience. And so some of our own, I guess, in our network, they've talked a lot about the convergence of single family and multifamily. And a lot of it's because the multifamily owners are running out of places to build. There is, as you mentioned, the build to rent. That's also a trend as well. But
build to rent single family.
Build to rent single family. Yeah, sorry. But I think that there's a lot of, I know there is private equity that's starting to buy up single family homes so that they can then rent those out. And that is the clash also that is happening in the industry right now, that we don't know how it's going to play out, but it's pretty fascinating to see.
In that clash, Ed, part of the issue with it is that there aren't a lot of property management companies that are set up to rent mass single family distributed homes, or even just like even built to rent single family homes. And so a lot of these private equity folks are buying up 1,000 or 10,000 homes, and then they're coming to our typical client that's used to running multifamily and say, great, go ahead and do this. But the back end systems like Yardi, RealPage aren't set up to basically do single family. The way that they market on CoStar isn't set up for that, right? So then they're starting to look maybe to other portals, but they're treating a lot of these as if they are multifamily buildings when you have 10,000 homes, and it just can't be done the same way. And so it's just been a struggle for many that are trying to take that business on.
Yeah, I imagine that's so in pretty much all businesses like that. It comes down to how homogenous is the housing stock you're trying to either market or manage or whatever, right? And yeah, it's definitely in other places in the world.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned at the top of this, just your business model is focused on real estate portals across the world. So can you be more specific, I guess, on what those real estate portals look like? Meaning you, I guess, are paying attention to Zillow, for example. So is it predominantly just consumer-based portals that you're evaluating, or just like categorically, can you break that down for us?
Yeah, so real estate website, anything that's consumer facing, that is a marketplace where you can find real estate essentially. So it could be sales, it could be rentals. Sometimes we'll talk about like short-term rentals as well. So things like maybe not Airbnb, but like Zumper or Sonder or something like that. I do cover because they're kind of at least tangentially relevant to people running the really big real estate portals. But essentially what I do is not very deep, but very broad. So I will look at real estate portals, and there are about, on my big spreadsheet, there are about 900 active real estate marketplaces, real estate portals, whatever you want to call them, around the world. And it's reporting news and analyzing what they do. And then obviously making conferences, telling people about that.
And how does that look like past, present, future? Like, has that number been growing or shrinking? Is here in the U.S. for multifamily, CoStar is gobbling up all of its competition. So basically it's converging into one. Is that typical, or it's like we know a lot of the folks at Zumper, CoStar, and the like, and they've got their hands full in the U.S. It feels like, sort of battling it out. So going to other countries seems like daunting, and so then I could imagine all these niche players popping up, and that's why you have 900. But yeah, anyways, past, present, future on that.
Yeah. So we talk a lot about like the kind of shifting of business models when it comes to real estate marketplace businesses. So I guess. Whenever it was 20 years ago, when real estate advertising went from print online, is what various consultants in the industry call the classifieds 1.0 model, right? You're just taking what was in print and putting it on a website. Then there's kind of what we've seen and what we talk about a lot is going towards the transaction. So instead of just marketing a house, showing a house, you're trying to get involved in every little bit of the complicated process that is going from one home to another, right? So you see it with Zillow. They're trying to get into mortgages. They're trying to get into, so the showing time acquisition, they're trying to get into agents showing people around houses. But there's loads of other examples of, if there's 900 websites out there, there's about, I don't know, maybe in terms of really big players, maybe 25, and they're all trying to get into the transaction one way or another, whether it be mortgage or something else, or renovations, whatever it is. And the thing that's kind of happening now and will happen more in the future is taking a share of agent commission. And it's something you're seeing in the United States. It doesn't really happen in rentals, so it's probably not super relevant for your audience, but maybe it's interesting for them just to hear about it. But Zillow is doing this and Realtor.com is doing this, where they will basically qualify your lead to the extent that you don't have to do so much work, phoning round or whatever. And they'll take typically 35% of your commission if that property sells in the end. There's loads of other people trying to do this or variations of this. And that's, a lot of content for people like me writing it up.
35%.
Yeah, I know, that's insane.
The typical commission.
They don't say that officially, by the way. That's just some various consultants have kind of either guessed at it or had agents tell them. But that's not. I don't think that's public.
Yeah, well, it's typically anywhere from 4 to 6% if you get an agent here, and now that trend's actually gone down. And
of the revenue of the sale, which then they would get 35% of that.
They're taking 35% of that 5% or whatever.
Okay, got it. All right.
Which would still be like 2%, but on the average home in the U.S.
That's
being 350,000 is like $7,000 that they're making off that. Yeah. That's really interesting, and I get it because it's like Zillow. When I last thought I saw is that they only had something like 1 or 1.5% of the actual U.S. sales. So a lot of people are using it as their resource, but they're not, then going to the platform. And so Zillow needs to try to capture more, go from 1% to 10% or what have you, or they need to how do you increase revenue instead of charging $10 a lead? Let's get $7,000 off of one sale. So it makes a lot of sense. So back to, do you see that 900 websites continuing to grow, or do you think it's going to dwindle? Is there going to be a couple major players? And I think of search, for example, where there used to be all these search engines, and then Google was the dominant one, and now basically across the globe. And then now, people are like, well, is ChatGPT going to?
I was wondering if you're going to
squash that. Yeah.
Mention ChatGPT.
I think So what you were saying earlier about moving to a different country as a real estate portal business is like notoriously difficult. You pretty much have to buy across the border rather than expand organically. There are very few examples of companies that have done that successfully. As to whether there'll be fewer in the future, yeah, I think there will be. I think if you want to launch a new real estate portal, like a new apartments.com, a new Zillow, whatever, your time's gone. Like, you're not going to do that unless you're in like a really, really underdeveloped market. Maybe you're in parts of Africa or something, right? And especially not with a model that's like pay for lead. Like it just won't work. Having said that, there is enough, like, after Zillow or in the UK Rightmove or whoever have taken their slice of the pie, there is enough left for these, you know, number 2, number 3, number 4 businesses in most markets. So there's not like a huge amount of, I mean, consolidation is happening, but it's not maybe to the extent that you think it might be.
Yeah, it's not a winner take all, even though you would think just because our behavior has been go to one search engine. But with online portals, it sounds like maybe they go to multiple online portals. And I think about student housing in the US for that. Like, they will search on Google, Craigslist, and apartments.com or Zillow. Or some niche specific sites. But anyways, over time, I'm curious for you to expand on your comment around charging per lead, how that wouldn't work. Is that specific for more the single family, or regardless, why do you think that model would die off?
So there's an example of this. There's a company, or a real estate marketplace, I should say, called Move Bubble from the UK, who recently went out of business. Now their whole thing was, they were trying to do it the American way, as I understand it. So they were trying to get into, you know, their clients were these big management companies that had these big multifamily buildings, right? And I mean, obviously didn't ask them why they went out of business, but I think that basically there isn't enough stock for it to work like that. Also, you've got the issue. So I can't emphasize enough how unique the US and Canadian markets are, where you've got the MLS, and pretty much anyone who wants to build a real estate portal can get all of the listings in a day. You know, you just sign up or whatever, and you've got all the listings on your site, right? That doesn't work elsewhere. So it's not very conducive to a paper. You've also got the issue around like lead quality, paying for leads. If people aren't used to paying for leads, then they're not going to do it simply because they'll argue about the quality, right? So most real estate portals around the world, and I actually sat down and went through about 600 of the 900 on my big spreadsheet and looked at their business model. Most of them are subscription based. So you as an agent or a property management company or whatever, you pay a flat fee to list your listings on a real estate portal, and the leads that you get are the leads that you get. That's it. You'll get other stuff. So maybe you'll get access to some software, maybe you'll get some kind of data intelligence product or something, but that tends to be how it works.
Wow. Go ahead, Reed.
No, that's just super surprising, because what David and I have talked about when we, I don't know if fantasize the right word, but if we were to ever launch our own ILS, which is what they're called here, the Internet Listing Service. So that's where, you know, CoStar.
I got tripped up on that terminology recently. I've been in the business for like nearly 2 years before I had to ask someone I was interviewing what they were talking about with ILS.
Yeah. So that we would definitely go more performance based, and maybe more the Google model, which is surprising to me, as you mentioned, the stock or amount of inventory and how well that can actually work, or why you think it might not work. And Apartment List is one of the bigger disruptors in that circle of ILSs, and they do have the issue that you're mentioning as far as bad quality or that reputation, but they've also had a ton of success because people have liked kind of the fixed model of, if I get a lead or a lease, in fact, they're pay per lease, not pay per lead, I'm going to pay $300, $400 for it, versus I'm going to just put myself on apartments.com and those are the leads that I'm going to get, because they may end up getting flooded. And either way, in my opinion, you end up with a cost per lead, you know, so why not go performance based if you're seeing better results, like a better return on that? So to me, whether you go directory and it's like, this is what you get, you're still going to back into a cost per lead versus what you're going to get with, a strictly performance-based model. But what hasn't happened is more in between, which is what Google's done and obviously built a empire on, which is we'll get you like engagement, you could say. And then from there, it's kind of up to you to actually convert that into a lease.
That's interesting. I have to completely agree with you. I think performance-based model is probably better for everyone. I think a lot of real estate portals would like to do it, but because of, how the market's been for 20 years, they're struggling. So when I used to work at an aggregator, which was basically we'd take, sometimes steal, but mainly, with permission, take listings from, real estate portals all around the world, put them together and then sell the traffic back to the portals. And basically we used to do it per click or whatever. And increasingly they were asking us, can we do it on, performance, whether the lead converts or whatever. And I know it's a problem as well. So I was talking actually to a rental agent in the UK last week about something. And he was saying the leads that he gets from the portals there in the UK, he gets tons of leads, he gets tons of traffic. And that has traditionally been the way that the portals justify any price increase. But really what they want is like qualified leads. And this agent, who I'm not going to name because obviously he's got a contract with these portals, was trying to think of ways to circumvent the portals and basically harvest a load of qualified leads from lots of different sources so that he basically wouldn't have to pay the portals. Yeah, performance-based would be ideal for everyone. I think the market is going that way, but as with a lot of stuff in real estate, it's going to take a while. Yeah.
Can I squeeze one more in? Sorry. So on the Google comment, like we would maybe do something similar to that. That's a good jumping off point to, do you expect either of the big ad tech companies, Google or Amazon, to ever enter this universe? Because there's a lot of speculation stateside that they're going to do what they did with cars and what they've done with restaurants and the hotel flights. Thank you. Is they will develop their own ILS, and that will completely blow up this model that exists today. And then on the Amazon side, they obviously have the marketplace. They have Alexa in all these homes that are now also in multifamily homes. So they have as much or better data than anybody as far as like the behaviors of the market, of the consumer. And so either one of those, I feel like if they wanted to get into real estate, would change everything, but they haven't yet. And I don't know if that's an antitrust thing or if there's another reason that's kept them from doing it, but there is growing speculation that we will see Google do what they did, as David said, with flights and travel, and go ahead and make that move in real estate.
That is the $1-trillion question. I'll start by saying if I knew that, I'd be a very rich man. But I will also say I wrote an article about this and did a bunch of research. I think they will, but I think it will take a lot longer. I think real estate is much more complicated than a lot of people think it is. I think a really relevant kind of example here is Mercado Libre. So Mercado Libre is basically the Amazon of Latin America, and it started off doing online classifieds and then went into e-commerce. So Mercado Libre is the Amazon of South America, and it has ILSs, it has real estate portals, but it's not really investing anything in them. It's investing in fintech. It's not investing in real estate. And I mean, obviously it's a different company to Amazon, but I think it's very, they're very clever people. I think if they saw the advantages of investing in real estate, they would have done so a long time ago. Now, we did have at one of our conferences a couple of years ago, we had Facebook turn up kind of out of the blue. And it was the only thing that anyone could talk about was, oh wow, Facebook's here. We're all in trouble, right?
Some intern just shows up. And
it might have been. Yeah. I think they're interested in it, but Facebook Marketplace was for a while a big threat, I think, to especially kind of low end, as you would say, like single family rentals. But they've kind of backed out. There was some non-compete. I wrote a news article about it about a couple of years ago. I think they're kind of backing out. I think eventually they will, but I think it's going to take time.
Well, Well, the thing I wanted to not forget was you said that this business model is different in the U.S. than elsewhere. I'm curious if you have a gut check on which business model is more profitable. Because in the U.S., CoStar, it's like our opinion and many others is they keep not adding more value, and yet they keep raising rate 10 or 20% a year, and yet they're becoming less effective every year as we see it on the data. And so there definitely is, maybe they weren't capturing all the value they should have, but because they have such a stranglehold on the market, they can keep just raising price and not providing more value. And you mentioned how this company in the UK tried to do it, but it didn't quite work that way. So, and obviously they're going after small landlords versus large landlords, and maybe there's more competition, blah, blah, blah. I'm just curious if you would say, do you think the US is more profitable for the ILSs with that model than elsewhere?
That's interesting. So firstly, I would say people getting surprised or, angry about real estate portals raising their prices is like buying a rooster and then getting angry when you get woken up. Like, they're going to do that. Most of these are publicly traded companies. They, if you look at CoStar, they've had double-digit revenue growth every quarter for goodness knows how long, right? Getting surprised that they're raising prices is a bit strange, but I've got the data in front of me of like the profit margins of all these companies, and CoStar's up there. But then to go back to, everyone in the industry uses Rightmove. So Rightmove is the kind of Zillow and CoStar and everything of the UK, right? And everyone in the industry uses them as an example. Why? Because they regularly have like 60, 70% profit margin. So they're not going to change what they're doing anytime soon. Whereas you're seeing, well, not CoStar, but certainly Realtor and Zillow change their business model to this, share of the commission business model. Why? Because for all their, I'm going to talk about Zillow, for all of their kind of clout, for all of their branding, for all their traffic, they're still not that profitable compared to a lot of other players in other countries.
Well, I wonder if they're more profitable if they also have the advertising model and they're getting paid, for each listing that's posted.
Right. You're like double dipping.
They are double dipping. So one of the things that fascinates Dave and I is just what is the algorithm, I guess, within these portals as far as who shows up, right? And everybody talks about that with Google. It seems to us that it's much simpler when it comes to these real estate portals as far as their algorithms. But if you have somebody with the same, air quotes here, package, who ends up showing at the top? If they're kind of similar timestamps. So I don't know how much depth you have there or knowledge, but in Europe, how does that typically work if two units come online in the same month? Is it based on the listing itself as far as how rich that is, like photos, descriptions, etc., or is it heavily driven by who's paying the most? So they pay to get the listing on, and then the advertising model, I guess, behind it.
So I can only really speak about algorithms insofar as I used to work on one of these companies that did have an algorithm, and paid customers would absolutely always be before their duplicate, right?
Sure. Yeah.
I did a study. I think it was earlier this year, where I looked through again about 600 ILSs, real estate portals, and one of the questions I was looking through them for various different things to make some content. But one of the questions I was asking was, does this ILS, does this portal prioritize premium content in its algorithm? And I think it's something like 75% of them do. So as far as the user is concerned, users in most countries are used to seeing the listings that pay more at the top of their search, right? And it's an accepted part of the experience when looking for a house. In the US and Canada, I would say it's probably a little bit different, just because it's a very different market to everyone else. But I would be surprised if it wasn't very heavily weighted towards who's paid more.
Yeah. Well, one more point on that, I'm curious to get your thoughts here, is we have some pretty, compelling data that would suggest that there's not really a lot of value in paying, that premium to get shown first. And stay with me on this one, but if somebody's coming into one of these portals and searching those results, almost immediately, unless the portal doesn't offer these filters, they are going to start drilling down. So they are not looking, to, I guess, map the ocean. What they're interested in is, I need 2 bedrooms, I need this price point, I do have a pet or I don't, this is the neighborhood that I want to live in. So there's a lot of things that are predetermined, and so for them, that experience of just seeing tons and tons of listings that probably paid a premium to get in front of them is a waste. And so what they'll do is they'll go through those filters, and the next thing you know, they have a much smaller list of buildings or properties that they're evaluating. And so therefore, similar as I like to compare it to a dating app, if you really want better quality experience as a consumer, you are going to put in those filters, and you're going to drill down very quickly, so you have less to choose from. It's just too much. And so therefore, is it worth it, as a landlord, to pay this premium so that you're going to get more than likely a lot of bad leads? It's just a self-fulfilling prophecy, really. As if you think that, similar to a dating app, it's like, hey, I'm just interested in guys that are taller than 5'10". You're going to see thousands and thousands of profiles, right? But if you start talking about whether they like classical music or not, or what kind of art, or what are their hobbies, that's when things get much more qualified. So I don't know your perspective on that in the UK again, or in Europe, but for us, we've seen time and again that you will see similar results if you actually have, we'll call it the gold package, but something that's more basic. So you'll still generate leads, but they'll be much higher quality versus that premium that you pay for just more volume.
I completely agree with you. I don't think it's worth it at all to pay to be at the top of a list, a set of results. And there are a few portals that have kind of let's say gone away from that model and don't prioritize the paid content. But I mean, fundamentally, like, that model, the model of paying to be at the top works if there's a ton of housing. If there's loads and loads of units available, then yeah, I can see it working. But the narrative around just housing in general, all around the world, this is in the US, but also all around the world over the last 3 years, is housing is scarce, right? I get sent, I don't know how many press releases every week from all these real estate portals that want me to kind of peddle their narrative about what's going on in their housing market. And summarizing all of them is pretty much, housing is expensive, housing is scarce, right? So to your point, yeah, absolutely. There's probably only like 2 or 3 houses, units, whatever you want to call it, that match a searcher's criteria at any one time. So if you're a serious searcher, you're going to find what you want to find, regardless of whether it's at the top or wherever it is. Yeah, it's an interesting point, but portals have made a lot of money over the years in marketing, right? So they'll put, as part of your, I don't know, platinum package, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. Oh, and by the way, you'll be at the top of search results. So it won't be you just pay to be at the top of search results. It will be you pay us for a platinum package where you get 10 other things, and we'll put you at the top.
How viable do you think, getting back to, you mentioned the transactional element that more and more of these portals are trying to get in on. One of the other comparisons Dave and I have made, just related to marketplaces that we haven't seen yet come to fruition with real estate, is the Credit Karma model. So I don't know if you're familiar with Credit Karma, but they started really just as almost a, well, I don't want to call it BI platform, but obviously just quick, easy way, free way of finding out where your credit stands. And now they've built it into a transactional empire. And, we haven't seen that really take root yet in real estate. So as you talk about, this is where things are headed, or a lot of people are trying to get their hands into that transaction. Do you expect that to actually, I guess, improve or find traction, or somebody to surface as kind of one of the dominant players?
So I'm not particularly familiar with the Credit Karma case study there, but I mean, everyone and the world in his dog is trying to solve this in real estate, especially portals. Name me a real estate portal company and I'll name you a real estate portal company that's trying to get into mortgages. They're all trying to get into mortgages one way or another. And someone will fix it. At the moment, it's like trying to buy a house or trying to even, get qualified to rent a house is a bit of a nightmare pretty much anywhere in the world. There's so many moving parts, and it sucks, right? I think that the future of this is, there's an example of this in Germany, which is really interesting, which I've written about before. There's a company called Scout24, which is a real estate portal that obviously does sales and rent, but they're making a load of money now on their rental side through a consumer subscription product. So if you stay with me for a minute, because this is quite long-winded, they basically hit the ceiling in terms of their number of customers, right? So there's only a certain number of agents in Germany that are willing to pay for, marketing on a real estate portal, right? And they saw it coming and they said, how can we kind of mitigate this? Well, why don't we try and charge the end user? Well, what will the end user pay to do? And they kind of bundled all these services in rentals. So if you're looking to rent a house or a multi-family unit in Germany, you will be bombarded with marketing for this product called Mieter Plus. And what it basically does is you get to see certain listings on their platform before anyone else. You get to message the landlords directly instead of having to go through whoever. You get discounts on, rental insurance, moving services, all these kind of things, and everything. So all of your contracts, all the negotiations, everything is on one back end, which I think is the future. I mean, if you said to me, you pay 15 euros or whatever a month for 3 months or whatever while you're moving house, are you willing to do that to make your experience 20% less stressful? I'm going to say yes every time. And they've started making really big money on this. And they've got something like 300,000 subscriptions on there at the moment of end users, me or you looking for a house, paying whatever it is, 15 euros a month to do this. So it's maybe not a perfect answer to your question, but that's the kind of the product that I see out there, which I think people should be emulating, and which is obviously doing really well.
Well, you jumped in front of my question was going to be, who do you think is innovating in the space and we should watch? And so it sounds like Scout24 is the one.
There's a few others. I mean, so there's a company in Brazil called Quinto Andar, which is the market leader in Brazil, which is really interesting because it didn't start as an ILS, as a portal. It started as a brokerage, which said, so think of kind of Redfin, I guess this is the nearest comparison you'd have, where a brokerage company is effectively like the number 2 or 3 real estate marketplace. So Redfin's obviously got a lot of traffic. People go to Redfin sometimes instead of Zillow, but Redfin's obviously a brokerage, right? And that's how it works in a lot of developing countries. A lot of these companies they'll start off as like brokerages, and they'll say to other brokerages, well, you can list on our site or whatever, and we'll take a split of the commission. So you've now got a situation in Brazil and a few other countries where the leading ILS is actually a brokerage, which is quite interesting.
Do you think these sites in other countries, in the U.S., the turnover rate each year is like 50% for multifamily housing. So someone moves basically every 2 years. Is it the same in other countries? Because I wonder about if I was renting from your mom, as you said, like that, to me, that kind of person is like someone in New York or San Francisco, and they tend to stay in their unit for a while because they make a personal relationship. All I'm saying is there any brand loyalty that gets built up, like where now the next time I go to this place in Brazil or tour or whatever you called it in Germany, Scout24, because in the US, I don't think there's much brand loyalty to apartments.com, even though you're moving every 18 to 24 months. And so you would think, oh, this is a good experience, I should go back there.
That's a good question. Honestly, I don't know. I think it's a country by country basis. I think you've got certain countries where there is just one dominant market leader, and that's who you go to. And others, like in the US, where maybe you're not so loyal to apartments.com or whoever. But it's an interesting question.
Yeah, I just, if I'm them, it's just so, I mean, I guess to your point about Scout24, if it's such a better experience, it's like having Amazon Prime for moving or something, then word of mouth spreads and then you get these 300,000 people, which is super impressive. But you would, I just think about the amount of pain you'd have to remove for someone in the US to do that. So we've had some folks on the show before that are apartment locators, and that's only in certain dense cities like Chicago or Austin or something, where they will take 1 or 2 months of rent for placing someone in your building, and they will typically have their a preferred building. So they've got deals with 100 buildings saying, hey, if I bring you someone, I get 2 months rent to bring them to you, which is a massive payoff for them. But a lot of even our staff, as they move to Denver, they don't even think that an apartment locator is a thing. And yet nobody really wants to go tour a half dozen buildings. They tour like 2 places. So it doesn't cost them anything to use a locator. And yet that locator is going to provide a white glove sort of service, yada, yada, yada. But it's just not, the awareness isn't there for people to do it. And so I could see other countries where, like that, it would be really interesting for someone to get, I guess, the awareness and to be able to scale that where they haven't been able to in the US. Yeah, I think real estate portals are ideally placed to bring this kind of product out because they are where everyone starts their search, right? So they can just put, even like a pop-up, like, hey, we're doing the service, whereas I guess these apartment locators you're talking about, they're fairly small operations, and if they don't get their marketing right, then it doesn't matter how good their product is. So I've been writing about these subscription products because there's a few others. There's Scout24, which is the kind of one that everyone's looking at, but there are other people. There's people in India, there's people in Australia doing a similar thing. The people doing it are these real estate portal companies, these ILSs, and I personally think Zillow should be doing it, or will start doing it fairly soon, because as you said, if it works out and it's a big payoff for them, why not try? You've got all the relationships you need to build that product already. I think they will. Reed has made predictions before about Alexa becoming basically a matchmaker. So this is just like it's the whole, like, how do you test this easily? Like lean, you could test it lean with a call center, right? Where they become matchmakers for your apartment, but then your moving company and insurance company and all that. Yeah, that would be interesting. I wanted to pick up on a couple things David said. So he mentioned the tour. He wasn't going necessarily down this path, but we often see lead to lease be around 5% when it comes to the general, I'll say, leads that come in for apartments. And then tour to lease is somewhere around 30%. So I'm curious, in Europe, and I know you mentioned things are very different based on country, but even some of these platforms, the Scout24, what conversion rates look like? Because I think that obviously is a huge driver as far as what the model's going to look like moving forward. And we've speculated, and we hear other thought leaders talk about it is going to be more about quality. The better the data gets, and that's also in conflict. We haven't gotten into fair housing or the governance of data, the protection of consumer data. If that's going to stall that out, that I guess progress or idea that data is going to be so good that you won't deal with the garbage leads. So that's almost a separate topic. But I want to just get your comments or differences related to conversion rates. And then the second part of that David also spurred for me is just the touring. We're seeing self-guided tours really take off in North America. So there's more and more folks that are saying, I don't want somebody to show me the unit. I'm going to have a phone. It's going to let me into the property, and then I can just go to a specific unit and tour it myself. So first part of that, if you don't mind, conversions, what do those look like? Tour to lease, lead to lease. And then if you can comment on if there's any similar trends starting to unfold related to self-guided tours. So with regard to the first part of that question, that is the one piece of data that almost nobody has. These big public companies that I look at and analyze, that's the one metric that they never ever disclose, is how their leads convert. Obviously there's there's not only the kind of how the investors would react to it, there's also you've got to get that data from third parties, from your customers, right? Just kind of purely anecdotally, going back to the rental agent that I spoke to in the UK last week, he didn't give me a percentage, but he and others that I've spoken to have said it converts really, really poorly. The real estate portals used to say, we have given you, their argument for putting their prices up was always volume of traffic, volume of leads, right? They're still kind of
turning that around to quality of leads. I think in the US, you're probably ahead of everyone else. And that leads on to the second part of your question, which is self-touring. I've not seen it that much outside of North America. I think you guys are ahead in a lot of different things when it comes to prop tech. But yeah, that's, as a renter myself, yeah, I'd much rather show myself around a property than have someone try and sell me it.
Well, some of that may be because of the amount of multifamily, and I don't know, David, if you have knowledge or thoughts around single family and how much that's being leveraged. Because if it is just a single unit or single family real estate, you're maybe less likely. Typically, you're going to have an agent to just open your home up to people, but.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I was just visiting my Uncle Mike, as you know, Reed, and he's a real estate agent, and he has been for 40 years. And he made a comment on our vacation. He's like, I just don't even understand why my job exists. He's like, it's just so easy to go online and find what you need, show up, and for somebody to unlock a smart lock during the time you're supposed to be there, you tour around and then execute. He's like, it's so much less friction than dealing with a real estate agent. And then we got into, I challenged and I said, I get that for maybe the majority of the country, but he specifically works out of the gorge in the Pacific Northwest. And it's just like buying a house in the mountains here. It's like just being on the other side of the mountain or on the other slope could just be a very different experience. And people don't want to have to drive around for 20 minutes between house showings or whatever. So he agreed that if you're in a market where it's very specific real estate, you would want that white glove service. But if you're buying in Dallas, Texas, it's like might as well be a smart lock that lets you in. So he was saying he didn't think real estate, even though he was sort of sour on the topic, he was like, I don't think real estate agents are going to completely leave. In particular, there's also all these people now trying to invest. And then that's where you want a real estate agent to just ping you when they have a good investment property. But overall, he was just saying clearly the market is moving towards just complete online, smart lock, and take your tour.
Yeah, I agree. I would certainly be more afraid if I were a rental agent than a sales agent. I mean, when it's such a big purchase, it's the biggest purchase of your life, blah, 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 you kind of, even if you think you can do it yourself, you still kind of want someone to hold your hand. Whereas when it's a rental, you've probably done it once or twice before. It's not such a big investment. Maybe, as is the case in a lot of places in the US with multifamily, maybe, the housing units, I don't like that word unit, by the way, the homes, the homes are all kind of homogenous, and you could, the technology allows it a bit more. I'd certainly be a lot more worried about it if I was a rental agent than a sales agent.
Yeah. Well, Ed, since you've got such a, as you said, wide scope, I'm just curious if you have any hot takes or sort of contrarian thoughts in the rest of the industry. And an example I give is we've had a number of guests come on that say, hey, you should cancel all your ILS in the US and just move to Google advertising on your website. I don't think something like that could maybe necessarily work in these other countries, as you're pointing out, because if you're just a one unit landlord, you're not going to build a website and then run Google ads for that and whatnot. So it seems like portals are here to stay for some time, but just generally speaking, any contrarian thoughts on the industry?
I don't know about contrarian. I mean, I will say this. I don't like when people say the word unit. I think you all need to take the word unit and replace it with the word home. I don't think if any agent is using the word unit to describe somebody's future home, they need to stop doing that. But nothing super controversial about don't use real estate portals. I'm from the industry press of real estate portals. I'm supposed to be pro real estate portals, so use real estate portals, please. But I would certainly agree with what you said, Reed, about don't pay to be at the top of this unless it's a market with an oversupply of inventory. Then don't do it. I think my kind of, maybe not controversial, but what I think will happen, which will be increasingly relevant, and it's not an original thing, but AI is going to take away 50% of what agents do. I really think that the more everything becomes connected, the more everything's just done via plugging one system into another system via an API, the less kind of donkey work there's going to be. Even stuff like writing a listing description or saying what's in a certain home unit, whatever you want to call it. Like there's AI now that will take a picture of the unit, the listing, and tell you if it's got an oven or a dishwasher or this or that. And like, I think there's going to be maybe 50% fewer agents within 15 years. I think it's a profession that a lot of people look at and think, oh, I could do that. I'm a people person. And the people person part of it will still exist, but all of the kind of, I guess, donkey work that probably takes up about 75% of these people's day is going to go away, and there's going to be a lot fewer of them.
You know, it just occurred to me, and I don't know if this is contrarian, it's just a big question that just popped into my brain as you were asking him that, is I don't know if AI leasing agents, you'd mentioned, AI replacing 50% of the agents has hit Europe as much as it's hit the States. So with the property management companies, you go to a website these days, like of a property, and you're almost guaranteed to be hit by an AI leasing agent, a bot. And the idea of that is to cut down on the amount of kind of trivial, or I guess, questions that often come up, so that you can get to a better quality lead and leverage your sales, your property leasing agent more effectively, so that they're not inundated with just all these basic questions. And what we've heard is 50 to 60% now of what was the typical dialogue has been cut down because of them. So one question is that hitting Europe as well, AI leasing agents? And then part two of that is, why haven't they made it onto these portals? So I think it's in conflict with the business model. But when you go to apartments.com, you do not get hit with a bot that says, let me help you find your apartment. And the reason I think is because if you did, and 50 to 60% of that kind of exchange were cut down, then that would cut right into their model, because it's like, well, now you have an AI leasing agent that is significantly accelerating the process of me finding that apartment, instead of, just going through, again, thousands and thousands of different paying listings. So if you follow me, I'm curious. The first one is, are AI leasing agents a thing on property sites in Europe, or I guess across the globe, the way that they've hit here in America? And then part two of that is, any thoughts on whether portals will start adopting that AI bot as well?
Good question. I think the first part of your question comes down to what, I think we've mentioned it 4 or 5 times, how homogenous the housing stock is that you're talking about, right? So if you've got, just taking an example of like someone asking questions about a certain listing they've seen on an ILS, right? If you've got a certain, let's say they're asking, do you accept pets? Now, if on a real estate portal, you've got, 10,000 rental listings from 7,000 different landlords or management companies, then it doesn't really work, because you don't know whether a certain listing accepts pets or whatever it happens to be, right? So I guess at least in multifamily in the US, you've got there's a blanket policy for every company will accept pets or not, for example, right? So I've not seen it in Europe, to answer your question. And will portals have these AI chatbots? I think if you ask the portals, I think they would say that's not our job. I don't think that they will have AI chatbots, but there's one really interesting example from Ireland where they did. It was a company called Lintil, who I actually interviewed, and they plugged their kind of AI chatbot into the leading portal there for a trial. And it was basically like, how can I help you? It wasn't on the portal as you're going through listings. It was like a step further. Once you'd like made an inquiry or whatever, you got this chatbot pop up and like, can I help you with financing? Where are you looking to rent? Blah, 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 blah. And for me, it worked. Now, they didn't scale it. It didn't end up going, I think it was in production for a bit, but only on like an A/B testing or something. But people are definitely looking at it. And I think it's interesting.
See, that's a bit of my hot take. David's heard this before. Is I think an agnostic AI leasing agent is the future. So the problem today in the States is if I go to a property website and I get hit with one of these, it is only trying to sell me into that property. So if they don't have 2-bedroom, 2-bath and my price point, it does not say, hey, here's another property that you might want to go look at. And so it is exhausting for me to think I'm going to go to one property site to the next and have to start over with one chatbot to the next, to the next, to the next. It's a terrible experience. And that's what leads me to Amazon, which is like, why can't I just go up to, my Amazon device and say, hey, I'm looking for a property in this price point, I have pets. And then it just surfaces, here's 5 to 6 different, possibilities. You're doing that anyways online, right, with Google, but eventually shouldn't it move to these AI leasing agents? And why wouldn't then an apartments.com say, we can deliver that now because we are agnostic. We have thousands of properties. Let's make this way easier process for you and just engage with this chatbot and it will significantly cut down your time to find your new home.
Yeah, so Zillow is the only, so there was a press release from Zillow about, 6 weeks ago. Basically, they're doing what you just said there. They are allowing, or they are integrating voice search. What your query there would be a perfect example. I'm looking for a 2-bedroom in this neighborhood. I've got pets. I smoke, whatever, right? And they use like a very similar example in their press release. So they're clever people. They know if they're doing it, you can be sure that others are going to do it in the future. But you're right. They are the perfect agent in the kind of whole transaction to be doing that rather than, an individual management company or agent.
Well, I would say like the CoStar with apartments.com in the States has the innovator's dilemma. Like there's no reason for them to try to do something like that and then risk ticking off all their advertisers. So they'd have to either do like a skunkworks project and test this thing out as another way, or do it as Ed was saying of like maybe you charge someone for the bot, like the consumer for the bot, which isn't our behavior in the US. But anyways, maybe it could work because that's what they are talking about with OpenAI. Like instead of you searching for what resort to go to in Cancun, you say, hey, what's the best resort for me to go to in Cancun? So that you don't have to look through all the travel sites. But Ed, I do one other question. I know we're getting close on time here, but do you think that the model of these multifamily buildings will migrate to other places on the globe? If so, like why? Or will it just be like sort of pockets here and there, but really it's all about kind of the what everyone else is already doing anyways, where you have like one landlord to one unit?
I think it's a good question. I think the big limiting factor here is NIMBYism, right? Not in my backyard. So people, I'm going to use my parents as an example here. They're trying to build they've got a field, they're trying to sell it to build some housing, and everyone and his dog is against it, right? People tend to be more dead set against these big buildings being built in their neighborhood more than they are smaller housing units, right? At least in Western Europe. So I say anyone, obviously they do get built in Western Europe, but it tends to be a lot more difficult to build bigger buildings with more housing units in any given point in Western Europe. Now, obviously, developing markets is completely different, and I think it probably will. But at least as far as Western Europe goes, it's really difficult to even build these buildings anywhere because you've got people going, no, we don't want those being built near us. And, the government, the framework of who gets a say in these things isn't strong enough to just build them anyway.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, so it sounds like they're okay with having a 6-story condo building or something where owners buy the 100 different units, but they're less comfortable with, just pure rentals popping up.
Yeah, it's a bit of a classist thing as well. People don't want rental accommodation built near them because they will associate that with, there's going to be poor people here. It's not great, but at least in the UK, that's definitely how it works. So people would much rather that larger, more kind of upmarket buildings were built and then sold and then maybe rented out rather than anything that's going to be built for the rental industry.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I don't know the pie chart, I guess, is a ratio of like the Class A or luxury developments compared to the B or C assets as it's thought of here in North America. But if you're getting luxury, building built in your area, you shouldn't be as, I would think, concerned or fearful that it's going to bring in lower income. And then the merchants win. So consumers may not like seeing some of these buildings pop up, but obviously retailers love it because it's like, well, instead of a few houses, I can get a few hundred, families that are now right here, like within 2 miles, so that I'm going to obviously get a lot more business, which then drives bigger economic picture. That's not something that the homeowner is thinking about, but they might want to, because there is a bigger picture there when you bring in these multifamily units, because you can get a lot more, again, consumers with buying power if they're on that upper end. But I can certainly understand why there'd be hesitation or fear of the lower income entering, which could lead us, and we won't have time to get into this, but just what that looks like in Europe versus the amount of kind of regulation and governance around affordable housing here in the States. Huge kind of topic and challenge also that takes us into the whole data equation on what's shared, what's not. And that's where I think Europe has been ahead of the States. You've mentioned several times some of the things like PropTech that we're ahead of, but not when it comes to data governance.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think when it comes to housing in general, when you obviously I read a ton about obviously real estate portals, but a lot of just housing in general. And it just seems to come down to like, if people can build or not, and what they can build tends to be the kind of factor determining absolutely everything. So I just written an article today about the biggest real estate company in China, and its economics and like what it makes money from is just completely determined by what the government does and doesn't want to build at any one time. And it tends to be like that in most markets, I would say. Most markets, the market, how a portal makes money, how like a management company makes money is all kind of in the end determined by what kind of housing stock there is and how much of it is available.
Well, this has been fascinating. I've got like another set of questions that I want to get to, but I feel like we'll just have to have Ed back on, because I'm so curious about the business model. Like, as you're talking, like, okay, what is the average like take of a management company somewhere else versus the U.S.? Like, how do the agents get paid and versus here, and yada yada yada. So Ed, we'll just have to get you scheduled for another round, because this is really fascinating to get out of our little bubble for a minute and just see what else is happening.
No, great fellas. Happy to talk whenever you want.
Cool. Well, Ed, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Edmund at onlinemarketplaces.com. When it's serious, it's always Edmund, never Ed.
Exactly.
Or you can find me on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, thanks, Ed. I appreciate it.
Guys, thanks for having me.